विघ्नों में आप सबका खैर मकदम है। डियर स्टूडेंट्स, हमारा जो ये कोर्स BEGC 132 है, इसका जो अनुवाद है वो है सिलेक्शंस फ्रॉम इंडियन राइटिंग कल्चरल डाइवर्सिटी। तो ब्लॉक 1 में हमने प्लूरलिटी एंड कल्चरल डाइवर्सिटी के बारे में बात की। ब्लॉक 2 में हमने लैंग्वेज पॉलिटिक्स यानी कि हिंदी, उर्दू और इंग्लिश के बारे में बात की। ब्लॉक 3 में हम मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं। ब्लॉक 4 की तरफ जो हम जाएंगे तो वहां पे हम विमेन स्पीक की बात करेंगे। तो पहले हम दलित के बारे में भी जो हम ब्लॉक 3 हम मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस जो हैं, इन मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस को हम दबी हुई आवाज जो है यानी कि जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस हैं ये पसमानदा तबके के लोग होते हैं, इनको मेन स्ट्रीम कल्चर में उतनी जगह नहीं मिलती है। ये डाउन ट्रोडन एक सेक्शन ऑफ सोसाइटी होते हैं, या एजुकेशनली बैकवर्ड होते हैं, इकोनॉमिकली भी ये बैकवर्ड होते हैं, और पॉलिटिकल सेटअप में इनका उतना और यानी कि इतनी इनका उतना इन्फ्लुएंस नहीं होता है। तो जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस को हम बहुत तरीके से डिफाइन कर सकते हैं। तो जब हम इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस की बात करते हैं तो हमारे इस ब्लॉक में मार्जिनलाइज्ड वॉइसेस में जो पसमानदा तबका है वो दलित्स है। तो हम दलित्स के बारे में बात करेंगे। तो द वर्ड दलित लिटरली मीन्स ब्रोकन पीपल। तो जो ही देखिए आपने ये इस तरह समझना है कि देखो जब हम इंडियन सोसाइटी की बात करते हैं यहाँ पे बहुत सारे तबके के लोग रहते हैं। तो जब हम जब हम हिंदुइज्म की बात करते हैं तो वहां पे जो लोग हैं इनको कास्टिज्म की बुनियाद पे देखा जाता है। वहां पे एक हायरार्की आपको मिलती है, एक लैडर आपको मिलती है। तो वहां पे जो लोग हैं वो बहुत सारे कास्ट्स में डिवाइड होते हैं। तो दलित जैसे ब्राह्मण है, क्षत्रियाज हैं, वैश्याज हैं या शूद्राज है। तो जो इंडियन कास्टिज्म है, कास्ट सिस्टम है हिंदुइज्म में, तो उसमें जो अपर स्ट्रेटा के जो लोग हैं उनको मोस्टली ब्राह्मण्स के नाम से हम जानते हैं, जो प्रीस्ट क्लास से ताल्लुक रखते हैं, जो एजुकेटेड क्लास होते हैं, या इवन कुछ जो और तबके होते हैं मर्चेंट क्लास से ताल्लुक रखते हैं। जो लोअर जो डाउन ट्रोडन सेक्शन इस हायरार्की में आपको नजर आता है उनको हम दलित्स बोलते हैं। दलित्स की जो पोजीशन है इस हायरार्की में वो सबसे नीचे है, तो निचली जात के ये लोग हैं। We would try to learn about Dalits in a detailed manner a little while later. Dalits, who are these Dalits? What is their main profession? Why are they being treated as what Gayatri Spivak calls the other? तो पहले हम थोड़ा सा डेफिनेशन की तरफ जाएंगे। तो जो ही हम दलित वर्ड की बात करते हैं इनको लिटरल मीनिंग में ब्रोकन पीपल बोलते हैं। तो यहाँ पे लिटरल जैसे जब भी आप लिटरेचर का मुताला करते हो, जब भी आप लिटरेचर पढ़ते हो, इट्स नॉट ओनली कन्फाइंड लिमिटेड टू लिटरेचर, इट इज यानी कि जब आप कोई भी बुक पढ़ते हो वहां पे आपको दो तरीके की मीनिंग्स मिलती है। एक को हम डिनोटेशन बोलते हैं, दूसरे को हम कनोटेशन बोलते हैं। डिनोटेशन में आपको डिनोटेशन क्या, व्हाट इज दिस डिनोटेशन? डिनोटेशन सिंपली मीन्स लिटरल मीनिंग ऑफ अ वर्ड, और द मीनिंग व्हिच इज अपैरेंट, सुपरफिशियल, द मीनिंग व्हिच जो डिक्शनरी मीनिंग जिसको हम बोलते हैं। तो उस जैसे कभी कभार हम बोलते हैं कि अगर मैं फॉर इंस्टेंस आई एम टेलिंग यू कि हेयर इज अ स्टोन, तो मैं किसी ऑब्जेक्ट की तरफ रेफर करता, तो वह यानी कि मैं स्टोन की तरफ आपको इशारा कर रहा हूँ, स्टोन, पत्थर। तो दिस इज द लिटरल मीनिंग ऑफ दिस स्टोन। व्हेन आई से यू पोजेस अ स्टोनी हार्ट, यू आर अ स्टोनी हार्टेड मैन, तो वहां पे यही यानी कि आप पत्थर का दिल रखते हो। तो हियर मीनिंग गेट्स चेंज। तो कनोटेशन का मतलब होता है कि हिडन मीनिंग, यानी कि लिटरल मीनिंग से आपको थोड़ा सा गहराई की तरफ जाना होता है। बड़े आपने जब आप कोई टेक्स्ट का मुताला करते हो, जब आप कनोटेशन की तरफ जाते हो, तो फिर आप यानी कि उस टेक्स्ट में आप कनोटेटिवली कुछ ढूंढना चाहते हो, देन यू फाइंड the author is using lots of symbols, metaphors, personification, allusions, intertextuality, metafiction, all the major literary techniques. तो वहां पे आपको बड़ी गहराई से पढ़ना होता है, तो फिर आप वो हिडन मीनिंग जो होती है वो आपको फिर मिलती है। तो जब हम लिटरल मीनिंग दलित का निकालते हैं तो इनको ब्रोकन पीपल बोलते हैं, बिखरे हुए लोग, यानी कि जो लोग हु आर डिसएनफ्रेंचाइज्ड in the Indian caste hierarchy. The position at the lowest rung is known as the untouchable or the Dalit. We were talking about this little while ago, that there is this casteism, the caste system in India. It is deeply embedded in Indian society. That जब आप हिंदुइज्म की बात करते हो तो वहां पे कास्टिज्म का बहुत दबदबा है। तो इस कास्टिज्म को एक हायरार्की में रखा जाता है। जो लोग हैं, लोगों को यहाँ पे आइडेंटिफाई किया जाता है एज पर देयर कास्ट, एज पर देयर कास्ट, जो उनकी कास्ट होती है उनकी क्या हायरार्की में पोजीशन है। तो जो दलित्स हैं उनको लोवेस्ट रंग में रखा जाता है, बड़े निचली जात हैं ये, बड़े यानी कि निचले तबके से ये लोग आते हैं। तो जो ही जब भी यानी कि इनको अब आइडेंटिफाई कैसे करते हैं, यानी कि इनको आप इनका प्रोफेशन देख के आप इनको आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं कि ये और द पर्सन इज बिलोंगिंग टू दलित कम्युनिटी। तो they lived and many of them still live a precarious existence. When you do a critical analysis of this casteism in Indian context, you always find Dalits, they are living a precarious life. They feel they are going through the phase of identity crisis. They feel they are a rejected lot. They are not being given due respect, attention in the society. They feel they are being discriminated and they are being abused by the upper caste people. So this casteism, we talked about this during the last lecture as well, that when when जब भी कोई निचली जात के से ताल्लुक जो रखता है, उनको जो एक डोमिनेंट कास्ट जो होती है वो उनको डिस्क्रिमिनेट करते हैं, उनके साथ इनजस्टिस करते हैं, उनको दे ऑलवेज लुक डाउन अपॉन देम। तो वैसे ही दलित्स के साथ होता जा रहा है। It has been since times immemorial that Dalits are facing this problem of identity crisis, discrimination. They are being rejected, even abused by the people who belong to upper caste. तो जब हम दलित्स की तरफ देखते हैं, they were forced to work in degraded conditions, denied the right to acquire land, and rendered almost to an inhuman state. So when you look at Dalits, when you look at this hierarchy of Indian caste system, you see Shudras, Dalits, untouchables. These are other names of Dalits, चाहे untouchable के नाम से बोलोगे इनको या Shudras के नाम से भी इनको जानते हैं लोग। When you look at their profession, they mostly are engaged in menial work. Their profession is like they are always engaged in works, जैसे स्वीपर्स का काम ये करते हैं, लेट्रिन्स की सफाई करते हैं, ये इनको मोस्टली इन्हीं कामों में यानी कि रखा गया है। और इनके साथ एक और डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है कि दे आर बीइंग डिनाइड टू एक्वायर द लैंड। In fact, they are not in a position to acquire the land. Such are their economic condition. They are not an affluent class. So when you see these Dalits, उनका प्रोफेशन भी उतना अच्छा नहीं होता है, उनके पास जमीन भी उतनी नहीं होती है, they are not they don't find even a place in political setup. तो they are rendered almost to an inhuman state. Thus the literature born out of this suffering, जैसे अभी हम बात कर रहे थे कि जो दलित हैं इनको निचली नजर से देखा जाता है, इनको जो डोमिनेंट कास्ट है इंडियन सोसाइटी में, इनको वो जो लोग इन दलित्स को दूसरी नजर से देखते हैं, इनको इवन कुएं से पानी भी नहीं निकालने देते हैं, इनको इवन कभी कभार ऐसा भी होता है, इनको जैसे वो पूजा करते हैं उनको कभी कभार टेम्पल्स में भी नहीं आने देते हैं। तो इस सफरिंग को जो ये सफर जो ये लोग करते हैं, जो ये इनजस्टिस फील करते हैं, जो इनइक्वालिटी, ये इनको जो इक्वल स्टेटस नहीं मिलता है सोसाइटी में, तो जब कोई बंदा उन चीजों को उजागर करता है, उन चीजों को डिस्प्ले करता है थ्रू द फॉर्म ऑफ राइटिंग, so that is being called a literature. Actually, what is a literature? Here the question arises: what is a literature? Literature is actually a body of written works. So it is, applied mainly to three genres of literature. It's mainly applied to three genres. One is called poetry, and the other one is called prose, and the last one is drama. Then they are having their own subgenres. For instance, if you are going to talk about prose, then in prose you study, you read short stories, autobiographies, biographies, essays. When you talk about drama, in a drama you read tragedies, comedies, romance plays, farce. And when you talk about poetry, in poetry you have subgenres like, a poem is could be written in the form of ode, in the form of lyric, elegy. तो जो लिटरेचर है एक्चुअली it displays, actually, human emotions, sentiment. It deals with human life. It tries to depict the human life as it is. So there is this element of realism in literature. That means a writer always wants to portray things as they are, and more importantly it try you know it just say it actually it is depicting things which are having universal or permanent, which are a permanent or universal interest. When I say universal interest, literature is equally applicable to all, people from all walks of life. For instance, if you are going to talk about sciences, be it physics, chemistry, biology, maybe these subjects are confined or in, to those people who are interested in it. Maybe a subject like chemistry would not appeal a shopkeeper, even a politician. But here, literature differs from other branches of knowledge. For instance, when a shopkeeper could be interested in, listening to, whenever he listens, hears a ghazal, he tries to, imagine that whatever is written in that ghazal, he actually equates that ghazal with his own life, with his own situation. तो कहने का मतलब ये है कि लिटरेचर जो है ये अदर ब्रांचेस ऑफ नॉलेज से इसमें डिफरेंट है कि इस इट अपील्स एक्चुअली मैन फ्रॉम ऑल वॉक्स ऑफ लाइफ. तो जब हम दलित लिटरेचर की बात करते हैं, दलित लिटरेचर में आपको ज्यादातर यही मिलता है कि जो इनकी सफरिंग्स के बारे में लिखा जाता है, इनको कैसे ट्रीट किया जाता है सोसाइटी में, ये किस मरहले से अपनी लाइफ को गुजारते हैं. तो यहाँ पे मेरे जहन में एक मुल्कराज आनंद की बात, मुल्कराज आनंद की नॉवल मेरे जहन में आ रही है. उसकी एक नॉवल है अनटचेबल. We talked about this during the previous lecture as well. If you are interested, to know or to read the condition of Dalit people, the sufferings, the injustice, the pain and agony of Dalit people in an imaginative way, then read Muluk Raj Anand's Untouchable. There's a wonderful piece of work on Dalit literature. That work it's a novel. It was written way back in 1930s, and the protagonist of that novel is Bakha, who belongs to this Dalit community. तो उसमें बड़े इमेजिनेटिव वे में आपको मुल्क राज आनंद इनकी सफरिंग्स दिखाता है, इनको लोग कैसे ट्रीट करते हैं सोसाइटी में. It's a must-read book. You should read it. So, the medium of expression in Dalit literature is poetry. When you talk about Dalit literature, so literature which comes from Dalit community, literature, where you find the feelings of Dalit people, Mainly, it is confined to the genre of poetry. Autobiographies are written in the literature and as well as short stories. There is also a pertinent question on whether Dalit literature can only be written by Dalits, since Dalit literature, as mentioned above, is an expression of the lived experiences of discrimination and oppression. तो यहाँ पे here the question arises. It's a pertinent question, very relevant question, a question which needs to be asked, not only asked, a question which needs to be answered, thoroughly, comprehensively. So the question here arises is, can Dalit literature be produced only by the people who belong to Dalit community? It's a question for you. You just imagine, you just think for a while that is it possible that the literature, the literature can only be produced, can only be written by the people who belong to Dalit community? Or is it like that Dalit literature can be produced, can be written, by the people who don't belong to Dalit community, who are non-Dalitas? So it's pertinent question. So यही क्वेश्चन है, कैन नॉन दलित राइटर्स एंड देयर वर्क्स, इफ इट रिलेट्स टू दलित, बी कंसिडर्ड एज दलित लिटरेचर? तो यहाँ पे एक इम्पोर्टेंट क्वेश्चन है, ये है कि क्या जो दलित लिटरेचर है ये खाली वही लोग लिख सकते हैं जो दलित कम्युनिटी से ताल्लुक रखते हैं? क्योंकि जो एक इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट लिटरेचर में आता है, जैसे दलित की फीलिंग्स हैं, दलित की जो कंडीशन है, जिस कंडीशन में वो रह रहे हैं, चाहे वो इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन हो, चाहे वो पॉलिटिकल कंडीशन हो, चाहे वो उनको फाइनेंशियल कंस्ट्रेंट्स हो, या उनका प्रोफेशन हो, it's always better that only Dalit could communicate those feelings in the best possible way than a non-Dalit writer. But when it comes to literature, literature is a broader term, it's an umbrella term. So Dalit literature can even be produced by the people, can be produced by the writers who don't belong to the Dalit community. So here it's now clear that it's explicit now that even a non-Dalit writer can write about Dalit community, about the conditions, sufferings, agony, pain, which through which the Dalit community, go through, the conditions which they experience day in and day out. Perhaps तो यहाँ पे अब इम्पोर्टेंट एक चीज ये है कि आप कितने इंटरेस्टेड हो दलित, अगर फॉर इंस्टेंस इफ यू आर अ नॉन दलित राइटर and you are writing about Dalit community, so what you need to have, you have to have sympathy, you have to have empathy with Dalit community. Unless and until you don't imagine, you don't feel for Dalit community, the conditions they go through, the phase of trials and tribulations they experience, on and off, then you can't produce a good piece of literature. तो जब हम लिटरेचर की बात करते हैं तो यहाँ पे एक और इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट मैं आपके साथ शेयर करना चाहता हूँ, वो ये है कि लिटरेचर इज ऑफ टू टाइप्स. टॉमस डिक्वेंस से एक रोमांटिक राइटर, टॉमस डिक्वेंस से, ही वाज अ रोमांटिक राइटर, ही बिलोंग्ड टू romantic era which is roughly the age of Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge, the age in which the great romantic writers like John Keats, P.B. Shelley, even जैसे Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt were writing. So there was another important writer of romantic era whose name is, Thomas Dickens. Thomas Dickens actually distinguishes or categorizes literature into two types. He says literature is of two types. One he named as literature of fact, and the other one he labeled the literature of knowledge. So literature of जैसे literature of knowledge, the first one he names as literature of knowledge, and the other one he names as literature of power. The literature of knowledge actually deals with facts. It deals with day-to-day reality. It depicts the things as they are. So this is a literature of knowledge. आपको दिन भर जैसे कभी कभार आप देखते हो कि जो फैक्चुअल नॉलेज आपके पास लाता है, उस फॉर्म को थॉमस डी क्विंसी कॉल्स लिटरेचर ऑफ नॉलेज, where from you get information, knowledge about day to day affairs of life. For instance, literature of knowledge की जब आप बात करते हो, when you read Charles Dickens, any novel, be it Hard Times, Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities, it's a wonderful novel. Actually, that novel begins with those lines, those memorable lines. You know, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. तो जब आप उन नॉवेल्स को पढ़ते हो तो वहां पे आपको, जब आप अ टेल ऑफ टू सिटीज पढ़ते हो, व्हेन यू रीड दिस नॉवल, what you get from this novel, you learn that in this novel Charles Dickens he's talking about the war which happened during in the 18th century or in the 19th century between France and England. So you are getting factual information from this novel. Although you are being provided factual details, factual account of the war, but in an imaginative way. When you talk about literature, when you read literature, remember one thing: it's always written in an imaginative way. Here I remember famous William Wordsworth's definition of a poet. William Wordsworth says, a poet, if you can become a good poet, a great poet, a substantial poet, a poet who could produce, who could contribute towards the society. He says a good poet a good poet is one who is having a comprehensive soul, whose imaginative power is immense. यानी कि unless and until you don't possess imaginative powers, you can't produce a work which would remain, for years, for decades. So while if you want to become a writer, a good writer, if you want that your books are, books remain until eternity, then you need to focus on this imagination. Talk about any great writer, be it William Shakespeare, John Keats, T.S. Eliot, or even if you are going to if you are going to look at Urdu literature, then you are having poets like Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib, then you have poet like Lama Iqbal. See the imagination power. For instance, Ghalib writes somewhere, हम वहाँ हैं जहाँ से हमको भी कुछ हमारी खबर नहीं होती. This is Ghalib for you. This is his power of imagination. हम वहाँ हैं जहाँ से हमको भी कुछ हमारी खबर नहीं होती. And when you read Iqbal's poetry, you find, the ultimate, the limitless power of imagination in Iqbal. He says, when you read his poems, वहाँ पे एक अलग तरीके की imaginative power आपको मिलती है उनकी, उन गजलों को, उनकी जो शायरी है, जब आप उनको पढ़ते हो, उनके पोएम्स को पढ़ते हो, तो जैसे वो लिखते भी हैं कहीं पे, हर शीशा टूट ही जाता है पत्थर की चोट से. This is, maybe you could say this is a factual point. Maybe Iqbal has said this though he had written it in an imaginative way, but there is this factual information that हर शीशा टूट ही जाता है पत्थर की चोट से. Now look at the second line. वो लिखते हैं कि हर शीशा टूट ही जाता है पत्थर की चोट से, पत्थर ही टूट जाए वो शीशा तलाश कर, मिल जाए तुझको दरिया तो समंदर तलाश कर. यानी कि वो लिखते हैं, वो गजल जैसे वो बिगिनिंग लाइंस इसकी है, मंजिल से आगे पढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर. दिस इज सुप्रीम पावर ऑफ इमेजिनेशन. मंजिल से आगे पढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर, मिल जाए तुझको दरिया तो समंदर तलाश कर. हर शीशा टूट ही जाता है पत्थर की चोट से, पत्थर ही टूट जाए वो शीशा तलाश कर. सजदों से तेरे क्या हुआ सदियां गुजर गई, बदल दे जो तेरी दुनिया वो सजदा तलाश कर. तो कहने का मतलब इवन here I am reminded of Robert Frost, one of the phenomenal poets of American literature. He had he writes somewhere, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, just to concentrate on each and every word and see the level of imagination, the height of imagination, the height of imaginative powers these poets, these writers possess. He says, the woods are lovely, dark and deep. Actually, this power of imagination makes the writer a different entity from the normal citizens, from cities, from people like us who are non-writers. Maybe we too are writers, we too could be writers, but उनकी जो पावर ऑफ इमेजिनेशन है वो एक सुप्रीम लेवल की होती है. Just to concentrate on this sentence of Robert Frost, he says, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." Actually, a good writer uses his imaginative power. uh, वो उस पावर के जरिए वो एक जो रीडर होता है वो आपकी इमेजिनेशन को भी बढ़ाता है. आपके जो मेंटल हो जो आपके जो पावर आपके पास है इमेजिनेशन का उसको भी ब्रॉडन करते हैं. So we are talking about William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth says a good writer, a good poet needs to have, or needs to have greater power of imagination. यानी कि if you want to become a good poet, then you must concentrate on this power of imagination, and you will have to think again and again. Then Wordsworth says, besides this power of imagination, that a poet needs to have a comprehensive soul. He says then the poet needs to talk in a language which is understandable, which could be understood by all people. So that's why William Wordsworth says in his theory of poetry, when he talk about when he gives the definition of a poet, when he says the poet needs to have these features, one important feature he says, Wordsworth says that a writer, a poet needs to put his thoughts, views in a rustic language, a language which is understandable, which even an ordinary citizen, could understand. And what is actually here? The question arises: what is the purpose of a communication? The purpose, one of the fundamental features of communication is that when you communicate, you want to send your message to someone. You are having this thought in mind that this mind message needs to be addressed. You are addressing your message to someone, and there is this thought in your mind that it needs to be understood in the best possible way, the way you want that it should be understood in this way. So the purpose of communication is that it needs to be understood. The message needs to be read by the audience in a better way. Unless and until, for instance, if you are when you read literature of, for instance, novels of James Joyce, even poetry of T.S. Eliot, और जैसे वो पोएम्स आप पढ़ते हो, देन आपको बहुत डिटेल्ड वे में वो पढ़नी पड़ती है. आपको अगर आप एल्यूजन से आप वाकिफ नहीं हो, इंटरटेक्सचुअलिटी से आप वाकिफ नहीं हो, आप एलियट की थ्योरी ऑफ पर्सनालिटी से वाकिफ नहीं हो, आप एलियट के उनका जो पर्सनल बैकग्राउंड है, उनकी जो राइटिंग्स हैं, उनसे आप वाकिफ नहीं, देन you could hardly understand a poem of T.S. Eliot. You would find, in T.S. Eliot's poetry, the technique of intertextuality. He had used allusions in an abundant manner in his poetry. So, for instance, he's always referring to William Shakespeare's plays, Dante's, even Dante's Divine Comedy. He's at times referring to Spenser. He's at times going back to Geoffrey Chaucer's poems, taking characters there from the Chaucer's poetry, taking a line from William Shakespeare's play. So that becomes difficult for you. So that was why that is which is why Wordsworth was of the opinion that a poem needs to be written in a simple way so that each and every person understands it. तो फिर हम लिटरेचर ऑफ यानी कि लिटरेचर ऑफ फैक्ट के बाद लिटरेचर ऑफ नॉलेज, लिटरेचर ऑफ नॉलेज के बाद आपके पास लिटरेचर ऑफ पावर है, जो टॉमस वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट Thomas Dickman say. Thomas Dickman says definition of literature. He actually says literature it deals with human life. It depicts the condition of human beings. It displays the sentiments, the feelings, the opinions of human beings. It is actually whatever it displays reflects those thoughts are of universal and interest. So they are having a permanent place in human memory, those thoughts, those things. तो अब लिटरेचर ऑफ पावर की जब हम बात करते हैं, which Thomas Dickman says it, actually it's a higher branch of literature. It actually it appeals your reason. It actually जैसे वहां पे लिटरेचर ऑफ नॉलेज और पावर की जब आप बात करते हैं तो वही फिर बात आती है आर्ट फॉर आर्ट सेक, art for life's sake. Again, two more important terms which I want to talk about with you people so that you could understand. Literature is mainly written in two forms. One we name as art for art's sake, and the other one we name as art for life's sake. So when we talk about art for art's sake, mainly we say this is a literature, a pure literature, a literature of emotion, literature of sentiments, a literature where you don't see the theme of didacticism. When you read art for art's sake, when you read a piece of literature, uh, which you categorize as art for art's sake, you find there a writer is never, becoming a teacher for you. He's never telling you you should avoid this thing, you should inculcate this trait and have this trait or habit in you. So art for art's sake, it's actually a literature which is written for art's sake, where you see only the emotions of a writer. He's never ever, in art for art's sake, you always find a writer is never having any didactic purpose. He never wants to become an instructor for you. He doesn't want to instruct you that you should do this thing or you should avoid that thing. So in this category, mostly writers say Shakespeare's art is for art's sake, John Keats's art is for art's sake, or even when you talk about Urdu language, you say Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib's art is for art's sake, because you don't find in their writings that they are appealing you. They don't want to change your character. They don't want to change your lifestyle. तो इसमें आर्ट फॉर आर्ट से पे वही आता है. Although there are reservations about these writers, you could even refute that Shakespeare's art is for art's sake, or even Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib's art is for art's sake, or for that matter, John Keats wrote for writing's sake. No, you even find in their writings somewhere down the line they are even trying to catch your attention. They want to even change your temperament. They write about the human desires. uh, तो अब ये है कि आर्ट फॉर आर्ट से में जो राइटर होता है वो प्योरली अपने जज्बात को हमारे सामने लाता है. आर्ट फॉर आर्ट सेक में आपने याद रखना है कि जो राइटर होता है उसका कोई डायडेक्टिक पर्पस नहीं होता है. उसका ये पर्पस नहीं होता कि वो आपके कैरेक्टर पे मुतासिर हो जाए, वो आपकी लाइफस्टाइल को चेंज करना चाहता है. तो फिर वो दूसरी कैटेगरी में आपको आता है आर्ट फॉर लाइफ सेक. मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द राइटर्स बिलोंग टू दिस कंट्री, बिलोंग टू दिस कैटेगरी, यानी कि great writers. If we look at the poetry of Allama Iqbal, we just a while ago talked about his a poem. We talked about his a poem, wherein he says मंजिल से आगे बढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर, मिल जाए तुझको दरिया तो समंदर तलाश कर। या इवन एक और लाइन में वो लिखते हैं कि सजदों से तेरे क्या हुआ, सदियां गुजर गई, बदल दे जो तेरी दुनिया वो सजदा तलाश कर। When you read, study Iqbal's poetry from a critical perspective, so you find Iqbal is teacher. He is a teacher for you. He is an instructor for you. He wants to change your temperament, your character, your even living style. Iqbal feels you are living a life which is, which is not sacred, which is impious, which is which is profane. So he says in his poems, he again and again puts emphasis on this theme that you should live a life which is in accordance with Sharia, which is in accordance with Quran and Sunnah. So he's a teacher for you. So Iqbal is not an exceptional case. Even talk about William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, in his poems, when we read William Wordsworth's definition of poet, even William Wordsworth has, he had categorically said that whenever you are going to read my poetry, that means William Wordsworth's poetry, he says, you know, consider me always a teacher and nothing else. So this is Wordsworth speaking, talking about his own self, talking about his own poetry. He's talking about his own writing, that he's telling his readers that whenever, as and when you are going to take my writing in your hand, my work in your hand, consider me. This is important, very important, that whenever you read William Wordsworth's poetry, you will have to remember one thing, that is this, consider him as a teacher. So again and again, when you read his poetry, when you read his poems, William Wordsworth is a teacher for you. He's exactly similar, in a similar way as Iqbal is a teacher for you. वैसे ही अगर आप टी.एस. इलियट की बात करोगे, a wonderful poet of a modern English literature. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature as well, way back in 1948. It's been said that the modern English poetry, chiefly rests on two poets. जैसे हम एक तो है टी.एस. इलियट and the other one is W.B. Yeats. Both got the prestigious, coveted Nobel Prize for Literature. So जैसे उर्दू की हम बात करते हैं, उर्दू में भी कहा जाता है कि उर्दू पोइट्री chiefly rests on two poets. So it's being said that when you will have to read, when you want to read Urdu poetry, when you want to judge Urdu literature, you want to judge the height of Urdu literature, the power of imagination Urdu poets possess, Urdu literature possesses, then read Iqbal and Ghalib. These are the two towering personalities of Urdu literature. तो इनकी पोइट्री को समझना, इनकी पोइट्री को जब आप पढ़ते हो तो आपको फिर समझ आएगा कि व्हाट इज दिस उर्दू लिटरेचर. तो वैसे ही इंग्लिश पोइट्री की जब हम बात करते हैं, मॉडर्न इंग्लिश पोइट्री की बात करते हैं, तो वहां पे टी.एस. इलियट आपके सामने है, W.B. Yeats आपके सामने है. तो बट here I would like to mention one more important point with you, that modern English poetry is not confined to these two poets only. You have a number of poets in English language, who wrote during the modern era, especially when the first war broke out, or even during the Second World War. There were poets. Even W.H. Auden was there. Even Thomas Dylan Thomas. बहुत सारे पोइट्स थे जिन्होंने पोइट्री लिखी थी. तो वैसे ही उर्दू लिटरेचर में भी आपको बहुत सारे पोइट्स मिलते हैं. सो एक्चुअली ये कुछ राइटर्स हैं जिनमें आपको कुछ ज्यादा चीजें मिलती हैं जो शायद बाकी राइटर्स में आपको नहीं मिलती हैं. बट इट डजंट मीन, फॉर इंस्टेंस, when we read Urdu literature, when we read the poetry in Urdu language, besides Ghalib, there are a number of poets who have written, memorable verses, memorable poems of universal interest. Even here, I am reminded of Mirza Sadullah Khan Ghalib's contemporary, whose name is, if I'm not mistaken, Muhammad Ibrahim, Sheikh Muhammad Ibrahim Zoq. Zoq was his pen name. His original name was Muhammad Sheikh Muhammad Ibrahim. So he used to write under this pen name called Zoq. He was a contemporary of Ghalib, Mirza Sadullah Khan Ghalib. They both were living during the same era. Even they were having you know rivalry between each other. Ghalib was having, even they were not but they were writing poetry against each other. जब भी आप गालिब की पोइट्री पढ़ते हो तो वहां पे आपको बहुत जगह पे आपको वो मोहम्मद इब्राहिम ज़ोक को तंज के अंदाज से वो उनके उनके ऊपर लिखते हैं। वहीं से आपको मिर्जा जो शेख मोहम्मद इब्राहिम ज़ोक है वो भी मिर्जा असदुल्ला खान गालिब पे तंज करता था। एक्चुअली how this rivalry broke out, there was a reason that Ghalib was a phenomenal poet. Even during his own days, he was respected, hugely respected by the literary critiques of his own era. People, even जो भी जब भी royal poets की बारी आती थी तो there was this thought that Ghalib should be named as the royal poet, दरबारी शायर जिसको बोलते हैं। But he was not lucky enough to get this coveted position that he would become a royal poet, darbari shair. But Muhammad Ibrahim Zouk, he was, he became this royal poet. तो एक्चुअली फिर वो एक राइवलरी थी इन दो पोइट्स के दरमियान। Even Mirza Sadullah Khan Ghalib, although we know Ghalib is a phenomenal poet, he is a poet who is a poet like Ghalib is born once in 100 years. Such temper, such imaginative powers that man possessed, a comprehensive soul he had. He was futuristic. He could predict things which is beyond our imagination. A great poet. अभी हम विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ की बात कर रहे थे। A good writer is always a futurist. A future. He's having a broad vision. He's always ahead of his time. He actually could predict what's going to happen in future. Although his predictions may may not be as fruitful as जैसे वो लिखता है, लेकिन most of the time is a good writer. Whenever he predicts that this thing is going to happen, when he writes about something which has not yet taken place, those things ultimately take place in future. That's why they are being called futurists, that they write about the events which are going to take place in future. You could, if you are going to apply this futuristic thought in English literature, then you have George Orwell. George Orwell was a futuristic writer. Even Ray Bradbury, he even too was a futuristic writer. When you read his There Will Come Soft Rains, There Will Come Soft Rains, it's actually a prose work written by Ray Bradbury. It was written way back in 1950s. Actually, this story, There Will Come Soft Rains. In this story, Ray Bradbury is talking about the year 2026, 2026 की बात. Even though we are sitting in 2024, 2026 is still 2.5 years away from us. But the man Ray Bradbury had talked about this 2026 in 1950. When he wrote this, There Will Come Soft Rains. If you are interested to know, this his power of just this power of imagination, his visionary power, his futuristic ideas, then you need to read his There Will Come Soft Rains. It's a prose work written by Ray Bradbury. It's a wonderful piece of literature. I'm leaving this to you, that you read it, then you will come to know what is going to happen in 2026. You would read the things in this story I mean, maybe you might have witnessed those things. You are still, those things are still happening in your surrounding. So later on, when you are going to finish that story, then just imagine, was Ray Bradbury right in his in his opinion? I mean, in his prediction, are his predictions valid or not? So what you need to do is you need to read this story called There Will Come Soft Rains. Once you are done with the story, then just imagine, sit down in a relaxed manner. At times when you read literature, you have to, you need to possess critical bent of psyche. You will have to read works from a critical perspective. You will have to apply your own brains. Leave theorists aside. Leave theorists, giant theorists like, when you read philosophers, theorists like Derrida, Karl Marx, Gayatri Scipio, Edward Said, Saussure, Ronald Barthes. There are this theory of deconstruction, even Michel Foucault, Nietzsche. You need not to apply the theories which have been given by them. You just apply your brains and read. There will come soft rain. It's a simple question to you. You read this story and just sit down in a relaxed manner and ask yourself: was Ray Bradbury right, correct in his prediction or not? Can we label Ray Bradbury a futurist writer or not? I mean, was he right in his predictions or not? It's only possible when you read, once you are done with this short story, this prose work, then you could evaluate, and you could, put your this opinion. You could say yes, Bradbury is right or wrong. So here we are talking about futuristic writers, a writer who is having a broader vision, who is living in his society but is always ahead of his time. You might have read George Orwell's wonderful piece of literature, another important novel, that is called 1984. तो उस 1984 को जब आप पढ़ते हो, एक्चुअली यू विल जस्ट इमेजिन, I mean, what power these writers possess. I mean, they are obviously, uh, जैसे ये writers हैं actually, I mean, we become speechless. For instance, Ghalib writes somewhere, मेहरबान हो के बुला लो मुझे चाहे जिस दम, मेहरबान हो के बुला लो मुझे चाहे जिस दम, मैं गया वक्त नहीं कि फिर अभी ना आ सकूं. This is Ghalib for you, actually showing his potential, showing what sort of writer he was. He was conscious of his greatness as an artist. Again, important point which I would like to share with you is this: a great writer is always aware of the fact that there is something in him. He's always conscious of his greatness as an artist. To talk about William Shakespeare, he even writes in one of his sonnets, as long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So again, Shakespeare talking about his power called pen. He says, I am going to be immortal. I am going to live, until eternity. I am going to live for the ages, even after my death, even though I won't be physically on this planet, but people will read me, people will talk about me, people would again and again, take my name on their lips. So it's possible when? It's possible only in the name of writing. He's becoming immortal. He's an immortal soul for us. Through what? Writing. Through his pen. He's with us. It's applicable to all great writers, be it Allama Iqbal or even Maulana Rumi और इवन इमाम गजाली, ग्रेट राइटर्स, चाहे आप किसी भी लिटरेचर की बात करोगे. तो अभी हम ये लिटरेचर की बात करें तो ये एक इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट है जो आपने याद रखना है कि जो लिटरेचर है, जो एक राइटर होता है, इसके पास इमेजिनेटिव पावर होता है, इसके पास एक बड़ा कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव सोल होता है. ही टेक्स interest in even in ordinary matters, in ordinary objects. The objects maybe we are not interested in. So that is why William Wordsworth says in one of his writings that whenever we tread on a path, when we walk, at times we, tremble, down this floor, under our feet. But he says, अब कोई whenever जब भी आप कभी कभार सड़क पर चलते हो, कभी कभार कुछ चीजें हमारे पांव तले आते हैं, तो हम ऐसे ही चलते हैं. लेकिन we, a great poet like William Wordsworth, a poet of nature, perhaps one of the greatest poets of nature ever born in English literature, he says, हमें जख्म पहुंचता है. We are getting deeply bruised. We are deeply wounded when we feel, when we see, when we observe someone is, walking on this flower. He's keeping his feet on this flower. So this is how, I mean, the love these people have for natural objects. तो जब हम विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ की बात करते हैं, विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ was a romantic poet. Again, this trait you find in romantic poetry, that all those poets, they were poets of nature. They talked about great objects of nature. For instance, William Wordsworth says a poet is always in nature with natural objects, be it an ocean or a river, or even objects like, moon, sky, stars, flowers, trees, mountains, rivers, oceans, streams, plants, trees, even leaves. Here again, I'm reminded of a great, again, another important poet of romantic era, John Keats, or even you could even bring the name of P.B. Shelley. They've talked about the seasons. They've talked about autumn. They even John Keats writes in one of his poems. About the autumn, how the leaves are falling from the branches. Even Faiz Ahmad Faiz had talked about this. A great writer. Great writers. They are always in love with natural objects. तो जो ही नाउ कमिंग बैक टू दी एक्चुअली अभी हम लिटरेचर की बात करें, तो लिटरेचर में ये होता है कि एक जो राइटर होता है ये बहुत सारी चीजों के बारे में लिखता है. अगर आप दलित लिटरेचर की बात करोगे, दलित लिटरेचर में आपके सामने क्या होता है? दलित लिटरेचर में जो राइटर होता है, he is actually trying to portray the feelings, the emotions, the sentiments of Dalit community. He is displaying their life, the day-to-day life, the affairs of life. How these people love how these people live their life. At times they are depicting in their writings that Dalit community, they are going through the phase of trials and tribulations. They go through this phase of agony, pain. They are being looked down upon by the upper caste people. We talked at the very outset when we just opened this discussion on Dalit problem. I talked about that there is this novel written by Muluk Anand, Untouchable. Muluk Anand, again, important writer of Indian English literature. In fact, he is one of the founders of modern Indian English novel. In fact, we can say safely that he's one of the founders of Indian English fiction, along with R.K. Narayan and Raja Rao. These are the trios of three great writers of Indian fiction. These three writers have laid the foundation of Indian fiction writing in English. तो इनका अपना एक मयार है इंडियन इंग्लिश लिटरेचर में. तो एक्चुअली they are the ones who started writing fiction in English language. Although there were a couple of writers prior to them who had written in English as well, but actually novel flourished. Novel actually, they have written novel the way Western writers were writing during those days. तो जब आप मुल्क आनंद की बात करते हो, या आर के नारायण की एक इम्पोर्टेंट नॉवल है द गाइड, Again, उसकी एक और novel है Waiting for Mahatma, Bachelor of Arts. तो when you talk about Raja Rao, उसकी भी एक novel है, important novel है Kantapura. Actually, this novel Kantapura is actually Raja Rao's Kantapura. R.K. Narayan is Waiting for Mahatma. Actually, these are the two novels which depicted the actually they depicted the conditions, pre-independence era conditions, or how the Indian subcontinent was facing the brutal power of imperialism, how the colonial powers were looting natural resources of Indian subcontinent, how they were subduing, oppressing the Indian in the people in Indian subcontinent. तो ये इन दो नॉवल से आपको ही मिलता है। तो एक्चुअली ये प्री इंडिपेंडेंस एरा की नॉवेल्स हैं। तो उसी दौर के आसपास मुल्क राज आनंद भी अनटचेबल नॉवल लिखते हैं। उसमें भी आपको थीम ऑफ कॉलोनियलिज्म मिलता है। उसमें भी आपको वही जैसे बाखा के जैसे वो कुछ वेस्टर्न कैरेक्टर्स उसमें क्रिएट करता है मुल्क राज आनंद, उसमें दिखाता है आपको कि that dichotomy which is going on between Dalits and the people who are belonging to dominant caste. उसमें even ये भी दिखाता है कि actually that novel is not related to Dalits only, the problem of Dalits only. In Untouchable, Mulk Raj Anand is actually talking about a greater problem, a problem which has been with us since the inception, we could say even since times immemorial, since the beginning of this world, the problem of this dichotomy between Western world and Eastern world. Actually, this problem has been, portrayed by Mulk Raj Anand in his novel Untouchable in a better way. So you read this Untouchable, you could even see the problem of this the problem this how colonial powers were looting the natural resources, of countries of Indian subcontinent, how they were subduing through their power क्लास के सर्जन के वो लोगों को कैसे वो जुल्म करते थे. He's talking about actually the British power, the British colonial era. He's talking in this, he's talking about this problem of British imperialism in this novel. So there is this dichotomy going on between the Western world and Eastern world since centuries. That the problem that the Western world is always looking at the East. That there is this stereotypical image in the minds of the Western people. They feel the people who are living in the East, they are primitive, they are backward. Although अब बहुत फर्क आई है, अभी भी कुछ चीजें हैं ये, especially when you अगर आप 19th 20th century earlier 20th century की बात करोगे, लेकिन अभी भी आपको ये कुछ traits मिलते हैं वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड में. They look at the Western world, they are from a stereotypical point of view. They feel Eastern civilization. It's not only confined to Eastern civilization. Even you could even bring Western African continent in this phenomena as well. Even the people who are living in Latin America as well. So the people living in Europe, in Western world, they feel that East is an exotic place. This is typical stereotypical image. They feel it's an exotic place. The people who are living in the East, they are primitive. They are possessing traditional bent of mind. They believe in superstitious beliefs. So, dear learners, we will talk about this during the next lecture. तो मिलते हैं next lecture में. तब तक आप अपना ख्याल रखिएगा. अल्लाह हाफिज़.